And let me very briefly introduce you before we start. We have Marie-Anaïs Esprit for Middle East, Europe, Middle East, and North America. Basically, we have a panel with great experts from NATIXIS regarding infrastructure, energy, finance team, regional heads, directors. I won't go into the details, but Marie-Anaïs, sorry, you are dealing with Europe, Middle East, and North America today. We have next to you, and happy to see you in person because we have actually had some panels when you were in APAC, and you are representing APAC. Kwong Wing Lo, you are with us representing APAC. Aitor Alava, you are representing today, and actually in your proper job, Latin America. And last but not least, online, and I'll come back to our moderators today, we're very happy to have you, Amit Roy, for North America. You would have loved to be with us, but you couldn't make it, so thank you for connecting live from New York. And I'll move on to you. Last but not least, everybody knows you, obviously, but it's better to just introduce you again. Antoine Saint-Olive, you are Global Head of Infrastructure and Energy Finance, obviously at NATIXIS CIB. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to have this last session with my colleagues from all around the world on the H2 topic, which is indeed a very global topic. It's global in terms of supply and demand, obviously. It's global because it requires infrastructures at the various locations to interconnect the different pieces of the ecosystem, of the value chain. And it's global also because it is a common priority for 40 countries that have issued H2 strategies in order to decarbonize their economies, to complement electrification, and to ensure their energy security. So as we all know, the H2 economy has been gaining a very strong momentum over the last 2 years, and there is not one single day when we don't hear about new announcements about H2, new projects, new MOUs, new partnerships, new studies, etc. And those news always come with very large numbers. Large numbers in terms of investments. We hear there is 700 billion to be spent by 2030. And big numbers also in terms of share of the hydrogen into the energy mix, as it is expected to satisfy 15 to 20% of the energy demand by 2050. So it's obviously very exciting for all of us, infrastructure, equity, and debt investors. However, on the other side, it seems that we are still experiencing a slow rollout of projects. And our objective today is therefore to understand what are the key trends in the various regions that you are all representing, and more importantly, what are the concrete opportunities that we can expect in the short term, again, in the various locations that you cover. So this is ambition for a 30-minute discussion. So let's be efficient and start our round-the-world voyage with you, Aitor. How is the H2 market looking at in Latin America?
Thank you, Antoine. Just starting by saying that probably Latin America is not the most developed region when it comes to H2. Nothing new, revolutionary I've just said. You were probably surprised if I said something differently. However, I think what I would like, one of the main takeaways from my comments today for you would be that we see an important role of the region in the mid-term, long-term. Why? It's very simple. Hydrogen needs scale. It needs scale in order to reduce the cost of production, and basically one of the two main parameters to drive the cost down is to have access to abundant amount of cheap renewable energy and also vast amount of land in which you can build all these renewables. And these two features is something that the region can definitely offer. Two countries that come to my mind that have already taken some initial steps with hydrogen. The first one will be Chile, and the second one will be Brazil. Chile business thesis for hydrogen is relatively straightforward. It's basically having access to a very good resource they have in the North Atacama Desert, probably the best radiation you can find in the world. And in the south, you have a paradise of wind resource. Onshore wind in Chile in the south have load factors of 60 and 70, and yes, that's onshore, okay? The thesis for Brazil is similar. Also, they have access to a really large amount of renewable, cheap renewable. Slightly different in the sense that Brazil today is a power that is already more than 75% renewable. So the business cases, you could even think about producing hydrogen in Brazil without the need to build an ad hoc renewable power generation, okay? The way we will see the region playing a role in this global hydrogen supply chain, it's going to be more an exporter region. There are a lot of studies, but probably all of them tend to say that around 50% will go to Europe. That's going to be the main market, 20% to Asia, 15% to North America, and there will be a 10% that will use locally or regional. So
Thank you, Aitor. Amit, you're sitting in New York. What are the main trends in North America?
Thank you, Antoine. Great to be with you all, and sorry, couldn't join in person. In the US and Canada, we are seeing unprecedented development efforts in hydrogen and ammonia space, and I'll explain why I say unprecedented. As we all know, both US and Canada have laid out national hydrogen strategies. Both the countries have announced significant tax incentives, including IRA in the US and something similar investment tax credit in Canada. Additionally, US government has earmarked $8 billion for 10 hydrogen hubs with the intention of converging demand with supply. There is a clear target set by Department of Energy in the US to reach a goal of 111, which is $1 per kilogram of hydrogen in 1 decade. That's an interesting target. And there's a target of 10 million ton per annum of hydrogen, clean hydrogen supply by 2030, I think 20 million ton by 2040, and 50 million ton by 2050. With this goal in mind, it's not surprising to see unprecedented efforts being made by several developers, several corporates to move into hydrogen. We have seen announcements of multiple green and blue hydrogen and ammonia projects in the US and Canada. Various kinds of key players have jumped in. They are independent developers, traditional fertilizer companies, traditional industrial gas companies, private equities, and even oil and gas companies, all working towards establishing themselves in hydrogen space to become a part of hydrogen supply chain, as well as some to decarbonize their own business. We are seeing innovation as well. We're seeing companies that have been set up to produce synthetic methane or synthetic methanol to combine hydrogen with carbon dioxide to produce these. There are generation companies who have started, and gas utilities who have started pilot testing hydrogen alongside natural gas. And the mobility sector has also started actually ordering. I read about certain Californian municipals ordering fuel cell-based buses and trucks. All in all, US and Canada can become both large demand center and large exporter. And that's the aim, I think. Eventually, I can conclude by saying there's a good level of interest, good momentum towards developing these projects. We are having quite a few exciting conversations, and we hope that some of the, more than few projects will take off in the next couple of years.
So we'll see that a bit later. Marie, what can you tell us about Europe, Middle East, Africa?
So in the Middle East, we have Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, and Egypt that are clearly positioning to become major producers and exporters. They benefit from a unique combination of strength, including exceptional renewable resources, resulting in low electricity costs, large land available at cheap price to reach economies of scale, strategic location for exports, the oil and gas infrastructure that can be retrofitted, and a favorable investment climate. These countries are targeting gigawatt-scaled projects, and they've already started delivering on their ambitions. Saudi, for example, has set the tone with the gigantic $8 billion NEOM green hydrogen project that was closed in May this year, in which NATIXIS acted as technical bank, environmental and social bank, and senior lender. The exports out of the Middle East will clearly go to Europe and to Asia, and in particular Japan and Korea. Now moving to Europe, hydrogen is of critical importance for Europe for the energy transition and the energy security. And it's expected to represent as well a big opportunity to boost the economy and for industrial revival in Europe. Europe will become a large producer. They will have to produce 50 times the capacity of the NEOM project, but this will not be enough by 2030, but this will not be enough. They will also have to import the same volume. The imports will come from the Middle East, from North Africa, and from the USA. Looking at the regulation in Europe, it is taking a bit of time in terms of execution, but it is definitely going the right way. Europe in particular is going to subsidize, to bridge the gap between grey hydrogen and blue and green hydrogen, which is key to support the offtake. And if you combine this with the carbon price and the carbon border adjustment mechanism, you will see in the short to medium run the growing of the supply and the demand. Now looking at Africa, it's lagging a bit behind, but there is a very big export potential. Front runners are Morocco, Namibia, Kenya, Mauritania, and South Africa. And North Africa is really promising in particular for exports to Europe due to the proximity and the existing oil and gas infrastructure that can be retrofitted. However, the sector is still embryonic and it will take 3 to 5 years for concrete projects probably to come out.
Thank you. So I suggest we go further east with you, Kong.
Thanks, Antoine. So I think we'll do a bit of a round robin of some of the major geographies, touching on what's happening in Japan, Korea, which will become some of the major demand centers. India and Australia, where we expect to see major export drives, and also touch on China a little bit. So in Japan, we saw this year a revised basic hydrogen strategy, and this is an update from the original strategy in 2017. So they've had this in mind for quite a few years, but the current ambitions now are to have a supply reach 3 million tons by 2030, 12 million tons by 2040, and 20 million by 2050. So a real scale up in their ambitions, and they want to drive investment of over $100 billion over the next 15 years. But it's worth noting there's been a historical bias towards grey and blue hydrogen. And some of the industrial policy, it's debatable whether it's driving net zero fully. Some of the use cases they have proposed is co-firing with coal, for example.
Sorry, Kwong, can I ask you just to bring nearer?
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so saying some of the policies are not necessarily driving net zero in terms of reaching full benefits. They do envisage co-firing ammonia with coal, as an example. And there's also a focus on fuel cell vehicles, whilst the rest of the world is focused on EVs. Moving to Korea, their strategy is called the Hydrogen Economy Roadmap. And it's interesting that they use the word economy in there, because that's what they're about, is transforming their economy to a hydrogen-based economy. That was introduced in 2019, but we've seen quite frequent updates to that with basic plan launched in 2021, and then latest developments were in 2022, where the Hydrogen Economy Commission launched what was called the 3-up strategy. Scale up, which is about scaling up their supply chain. Build up, which is setting up the regulatory and legal framework to support a hydrogen economy. And then the third limb of that is level up, which is focused on driving technology developments there. Focus on really driving large-scale hydrogen demand around transportation, power generation, and various industrial sectors. Interesting to, again, note, net zero is not the primary driver. The focus on is to drive economic growth and industrial competitiveness. And the sequencing of it will be to deliver hydrogen infrastructure, and then in terms of green hydrogen, that will come after. But they want to put infrastructure in place, be that grey, blue, or green, in terms of the supply, and then hopefully green hydrogen will follow. And their ambitions are even greater than Japan. They want to have provision of some 30 million tons of clean hydrogen by 2050. Moving on to where we see some of the export developments, India. They also have what they call it the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which is actually introduced quite late. This is this year, at the beginning of this year, that was introduced, with an initial target of producing 5 million tons by 2030. But they are committing some 2.4 billion of investment between now and 2030. Historically, they have been a net importer of hydrogen, but we see a lot of the industrial policy there now is to drive production and to be able to be in export markets as well, despite the fact that they do have a lot of internal demand for it. Coming on to Australia, going down on the next. Again, they have a national hydrogen strategy developed in 2019. They want to be targeting to produce commercially viable green H2 by 2030. But their policy is being revised in light of what's happened in the US with the IRA, which has changed the competitive landscape for them. But they have had comprehensive programs with a Hydrogen Head Start program where they've committed $2 billion of Australian dollars. And now we're seeing some of the pilot projects come through, establishment of hydrogen hubs. So that market is really ramping up quite rapidly. And then lastly, touching on China, they, again, in terms of policy, have been very late to the game. It was just last year that they launched what they call the medium and long-term plan for the hydrogen energy industry. But I think that's not to say they haven't had developments. I mean, they are the largest producer and consumer of hydrogen. But I think what we interpret that move is an official stamp where hydrogen has now been identified as what they call a frontier area to advance on, which means they're basically, what we can expect is strong state-led support to create for market creation and drive technology. And we've already seen that when they turn their mind to it. We've seen what's happened in the solar PV industry, EV vehicles. So we can expect certainly China to become a major player in their own rights over that time as well.
So a lot to say, but what can we expect to have on our desk as a concrete opportunity over the next, say, 5 years? Marie, in Europe, being even more efficient than what we have been so far.
So maybe a brief overview of the H2 investment landscape in EMEA to start with. We see lots of activity with significant developments over the past 3 to 6 months. The investment landscape is shaping slowly with large and diverse group of leading industrial and financial investors from all over the world. This is very positive as this will allow risk sharing that is much needed for a nascent economy. It's also a good blend of, on one side, the technical know-how and potential export with the industrial investors, and on the other side, financial firepower with institutional investors and private equity fund. And with regards to the latter, private equity fund, it goes even beyond pure financial firepower. There are some funds, investment managers such as High24 that are really moving the needle forward. They have €2 billion fund to deploy in the hydrogen sector only, and they're really starting to invest heavily in that sector. Generally, there is a surplus of capital compared to the volume of concrete projects we can invest in. And this is also the case on the debt side. Commercial banks are struggling to find the right project to invest in, and generally it's because of the lack of long-term offtake, which is key for the bankability. So with that in mind, there are 2 key recommendations, I would say, when assessing an opportunity in the hydrogen space. First of all, let's not forget that this is a nascent industry, so there is no quick turnaround. We need patient capital. And second of all, I think there is a clear need to focus on what we call the no-regret end applications. These are the hard-to-abate sectors that cannot be electrified and for which there is limited alternative decarbonization option. We have 2 categories. We have the heavy industries that traditionally use grey hydrogen, and we have new hydrogen applications. The first one is refining, petrochemical and fertilizer industries. That's the highest likelihood for quick adoption because it's a like-for-like substitution with no fuel switch. There is more confidence on the offtake side at large scale, plus there is potential alternative offtake since these industries are generally located on industrial clusters close to ports. And on top of that, there is potential to retrofit existing infrastructure and also to share infrastructure. So I'm thinking as a matter of example, recently Shell and Galp have reached FID to produce for large green hydrogen production facilities to decarbonize their refinery activity in the port of Rotterdam and in Portugal. Total has also launched a call for tender for 500,000 tons of green hydrogen. This is approximately 2.5 times the NEOM project in Saudi to support the decarbonization of their refinery activity in Europe. And in the UAE, we see ENGIE, Masdar, and Fertiglobe working together on a green hydrogen production facility to produce green ammonia that will then be off-taken by Fertiglobe and used as a fertilizer. Now moving to the second category, one of the new application, one of the biggest one will be green steel. As a matter of example, we have H2 Green Steel in Sweden. They're going to produce green hydrogen in large quantity to then supply to a new adjacent green steel production plant. The project could take FID by end of this year. It's more than 5 billion euros of project costs that are required, and H2 Green Steel has already raised 1.8 billion euros of equity with funds such as GIC, High24, Just Climate, Temasek, but also with industrials such as Hitachi Energy, Mercedes, and Schaeffler. And they've already also raised 3.5 billion euros of debt. And they've secured 50% of the offtake with contracts going from 5 to 7 years with car manufacturers and industries. In terms of new application, there is also the heavy mobility that we've touched upon. So this is heavy-duty trucks and buses. Europe is the second market in terms of size of fleets of trucks and buses, and in terms of operating hydrogen refueling stations. It's clearly a big push in Europe, especially with the regulation that is banning thermal engines post-2035. And we know that the whole transportation industry will not be able to shift with batteries only. Batteries have the limitation we know. Hydrogen fuel cell vehicles can offer longer range, lower weight, faster refueling times. They can operate at low temperature conditions, and they will not add pressure on the grid. So globally it will be cheaper and it will be more efficient in some end-use heavy trucks and buses. So it's still at its infancy, but the pace is increasing fast. It's very encouraging to see technological breakthrough and operational records, to see as well the scaling up of the manufacturing capacity for mobile fuel cell, but also the growing fleets of trucks and buses in Europe and globally, so plus 60% in 2022 for trucks and plus 40% for buses. And it's also encouraging to see the progress on the deployment of the hydrogen refueling stations that are pushed by regulation. And to conclude, there are other sectors that are maybe further down the road. Shipping and aviation, they will not be able to switch without hydrogen. Power generation will also use hydrogen to blend with gas and coal. And there's also the Power to X. Power to X is basically using hydrogen as a storage solution for curtailed renewables, and then use that hydrogen in a vast range of end use. And on the opportunity side, obviously, there is also the pure production with no dedicated end use to supply hydrogen to the sectors that I've mentioned. And there's also the entire infrastructure to connect the supply and the demand, so transport, but also conversion and storage.
Very broad range of products. Aitor, how is Latin America positioned in the mix?
I'm relieved, Antoine, when I heard you mention 5 years, because I thought you were going to say 1, 2 years. I want to start scratching my head to say, okay, what deals are coming in 1 or 2 years? But 5 years, I think, is a reasonable time frame. So when it comes to listing deals, I think always the question mark is when those deals are going to happen, because there's a lot of activity, a lot of willingness to push this sector. But it's more difficult to know when that is going to happen. So in Chile, probably is the country that is definitely ahead of the rest. There has been some sort of there's a strong political support, some sort of regulatory subsidies, nothing to the scale that what is in Europe or in North America. But for example, HIF has a pilot project. They're already producing e-fuels, and there was a news last week in which they're increasing the investment to close to 800 million in the next years. Then Total Eren, they have made public that they're willing to make a 10 giga wind farm in the south of Chile. The same Copenhagen Investment Partners, they have some projects to do up to 3 gigas. NGADF, all of those are basically based on the strong load factors of wind in the south of Chile. Again, it's 60 and 70%. Anybody that's familiarized with renewable know that 60 and 70 onshore wind, it's crazy, okay? Then Brazil, nothing really concrete. There has been a very quick change in the way the country is embracing renewables with the new government. The new government is definitely much more supportive of that, and they're quickly mobilizing their large infrastructure bank, BNDES. We have regular discussion with them, and we think that that could be a catalyzer to start seeing deals in Brazil in the future. And I cannot finish a panel sponsored by NATIXIS to talk about hydrogen and in Latin America, not to mention one deal in which NATIXIS is mandated, which is basically we're helping a UK-listed company to raise the debt and the equity to finance a 150 megawatt hydrogen deal in Paraguay. That deal, basically, the thesis is that they have access to very cheap energy. Paraguay is a country that produce more energy than the energy consumed, thanks to two very large dam projects, and they will probably produce ammonia and they will sell it to their neighbor, to Brazil, which is one of the largest consumers of fertilizer in the world. So those are the deals that I hope to put on your desk in the next 5 years, or maybe a couple of them.
You didn't tell me about Paraguay, but let's. Kwong, I imagine Australia and maybe India are also very well positioned to export. What do you see? What do you expect?
Yeah, so for those two countries, really, it's about hydrogen production and supply chain development. So maybe starting with India, in terms of the announcements, what key players are doing. Adani, obviously a big name. They announced intentions to invest up to 5 billion over the next 10 years in the green hydrogen ecosystem. They were supposed to be going with Total Energy, but obviously with the, some issues, controversial issues with the stock market listing, we don't know where Total will go, but they will nonetheless progress with their hydrogen plans. Greenco, a renewables developer moving into the hydrogen space, and they've partnered with John Cockrell to build electrolyzers in India, and they've just launched a sister company called AM Green. This is quite recent, and reportedly close to securing a 1.6 billion investment from Petrobras into the ammonia unit. So that's reported. It's not confirmed yet, but you can kind of understand the scale and the pace of these developments. Other names, Acme. Obviously, been active in the Middle East, but they will be building a 1.3 million ton ammonia plant. JSW, which is a steel maker, they've set up an energy subsidiary that will then produce green ammonia to supply their steel plants. So a lot of these production developments really ramping up. One other really notable development in India, however, is a SECI procurement. Now, SECI is it stands for the Solar Energy Corporation of India, and in the past, I guess, decade, have supported the development of renewables by providing a PPA offtake. So they've been one of the key, it's a state-owned agency, they've been one of the key procurers of solar. They launched a tender to procure hydrogen production capacity, which now we see is part of government industrial policy to really support that as well. It's not just the private sector, the government is also supporting procuring that capacity as well. Turning to Australia, again, a lot of pilot projects are now kicked off. So one notable one is Onji and Mitsui, the Yuri Phase 1 project, 640 tons per annum. That will, they expect to start production 2024. So the construction started last year. So they're close to be getting up and running. They have an offtake with the Yarra Pilbara fertilizers plant. Another pilot project, AGIG, which is supported by CKI Infra. Their Park Murray Valley hydrogen plant, that's a 10 megawatt electrolyzer. So we've seen these pilot projects kick up, and obviously there'll be follow-on phase 2, phase 3s to these projects. The other key developments in Australia are the, I guess, supported by the government, is where the government will be investing more than 500 million Aussie dollars into hydrogen hubs. And each state now has proposed hydrogen hubs. So in Western Australia actually has 2, in the Pilbara and in Kwinana, New South Wales in the Hunter Valley, Bell Bay in Tasmania, Glasgow in Queensland, and then Port Bonnythorn in South Australia. So the intention is to have these clusters of development and to get industrial players to be working together. So we expect those to really, I mean, we've also talked about seeing the pilot projects where we already now expect key industrials to get involved. Some of those will be BP, for example. They've just completed a feasibility study for the Kwinana hub. A lot of the Koreans, especially in Western Australia, we've got KEPCO have signed an MOU, got Samsung and Comipo in negotiations to build a 1 million ton ammonia plant, got Samsung and Infinite Blue signing MOU for another. So the Koreans and the Japanese are very active in building up their supply chain in Australia at the moment. So that's on the production side. We'd expect to see a lot of ramp up in this activity over the next 3 to 5 years. In terms of use cases, less visibility at the moment, but anecdotally, what's interesting to see that in Hong Kong now, we're seeing trial, what I think it's launched this month, they're trialing a hydrogen bus. They're going to trial that alongside an EV bus, but everyone, at least the industry experts really expect the hydrogen bus to come out ahead of EV given the hilly terrain. So we're even seeing developments of the use cases now rise up in the region. But again, focus on production, ramping up, and that's where we expect to be doing some business and supporting clients.
Thank you, Kwong. Amit, there is some pressure from Christina, who is already on the stage, so I think you have to cover America, North America in 2 minutes.
Ah, wonderful. No, in next 4 to 5 years, there is a flurry of activity that has gone over the last 2 years and after IRA was announced. So pipeline of projects is humongous. I am tracking close to, let's say, 25 projects in the US, 15 projects in Canada. So there is a very vast pipeline. In the US, most of the projects are in Texas and Louisiana. And in Canada, you can see equal mix on East Coast and some in Alberta and British Columbia. Let me start by at least talking about one project where we were peripherally involved and which achieved financial close, not in the commercial bank market though. This is a true case where Mitsubishi and Harrington developed advanced clean energy storage project. This project supplies green hydrogen on a 30-year take-or-pay basis to Intermountain Power Agency. Intermountain Power Agency is owned by Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. It's a take-or-pay contract, and eventually Department of Energy under the loan program, or loan guarantee program, offered loan guarantees, and Federal Bank funded the project for 30 years. We played a small role here by providing pre-FID debt. Our debt helped the project make progress before the loans from DOE were closed. So that's one transaction which happened last year. It's a 220 megawatt electrolyzer in Delta, Utah. Of the 25 projects, which let's say I'm roughly 25 projects I'm following in the US, some would eventually become leaders. There are two, of course, broader issues which need to be resolved here in the US. One relates to 45V guidance. It was supposed to come by August. It has not yet come in. That 45V guidance will help clarify which projects can then get $3 per kilogram attractive incentives. Now it relates to additionality, relates to time matching, relates to regionality. Until this 45V credit comes in, or guidance comes in, projects will have to wait. But there are projects who are spending dollars on getting the feed done, and those are the projects which will then can eventually capitalize and move forward. Projects in the US which are making progress include 2 by-air products, 1 blue hydrogen project in Louisiana, 1 green hydrogen project in Texas. Air Liquide has announced a few projects, one in JV with Chevron. Linde has announced a Beaumont, Texas facility. Exxon has announced a large facility. JERA has joined hands with Conoco. Fertilizer companies, CF Industries and Yara, both have announced 2 projects each. CF has joined hands with POSCO of Korea and Lotto Chemicals separately, and Yara has joined hands with Enbridge and BASF separately. And there are a lot of independents like Big Hill Hydrogen, Feederless Infrastructure, Avena Clean Hydrogen, and St. Charles, which St. Charles is now, of course, backed by CIP. So there's a good pipeline of projects in the US. We'll have to wait for a long-term offtake contract. Projects which are targeting Europe or Asia as offtake, they have to enter into a long-term offtake contract. That will be key from commercially developing it. And I think everyone is waiting for 45V guidance before they can finalize, take these projects further. In Canada, again, there are 15 plus projects which we are chasing, let's say, or following, not necessarily chasing. Some have entered into offtake contracts. Everwind Fuel seems to be the one the leader of the pack. It's in Nova Scotia. Pattern has announced project in Newfoundland. World Energy has announced a project in Newfoundland. And there are some projects in Alberta has seen a lot of activity with Marubeni, Itochu, and many other players, such South Korean players playing a role. So the western coast of Canada is targeting Asia as a client. I think East Coast is targeting Europe as a market, and hopefully some of these projects will take off. Clearly, announcements are not shown in the ground, but I do see a very healthy pipeline, and I'm sure as things get clarified over the next couple of years, we'll see these projects reaching out to us to seek FID.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry for rushing, Amit. Thank you very much. A great applause to you.